A Tale of a Muslim Girl and Her Infidel Lover. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This is an intriguing epic story which resonates with love, resilience, courage, and sacrifice. Before we dive into the tapestry of the story, I would like to remind the reader that this novel is narrated in 3 books. Book 3. The Muslim Apostate Girl and Her Infidel Lover. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief paragraphs for a review to be printed in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on the real life of a Muslim girl in Sudan. All names, characters, places, and events are either the product of the author's imagination or used literary. Therefore, any resemblance to real people, living or dead, events, or locales is merely coincidental. Chapter 66. The Works of Great Minds in the World. After the trial and condemnation of the anti-Semite Arab-Palestinian Christian girl Warda Haddad, the genius and gifted Sudanese Muslim apostate girl Dr. Ibtihal emerged a victorious person out of the false accusations and the split crisis. Moreover, the Muslims' liberation movement received worldwide acceptance in the non-Muslim world after the International Criminal Court in Hague ruled in its favor. After their marriage, the 2 intimate lovers, the dissident Princess Ibtihal and the highly educated man Kamal, dedicated their time to the service of the Muslims' liberation movement. In a brief time, the movement planted branches in most of the big cities in America, Europe, Australia, South Africa, Latin America, North America, South Korea, and Japan. Dr. Kamal traveled at least once a month to a different country to plant a new branch for the Muslims' liberation movement. In the meantime, the CEO Dr. Ibtihal was advised by the board of directors to refrain from traveling out of Canada except to the United States of America. She spent most of her time authoring new books on terror and misogyny in Islam. After the verdict of the International Criminal Court, which condemned the 2 main sacred texts of Islam, the Quran and Hadiths, and called for their ban worldwide, the liberation movement gained many members and supporters. The movement began to expand rapidly in an alarming way. Many thinkers and critics anticipated that after 30 years from the day the International Criminal Court ruled in the favor of the Muslims' liberation movement, there might not be an educated person in the world who would remain a Muslim man or a Muslim a woman anymore. The genius and gifted Sudanese apostate woman Dr. Ibtihal wrote 20 controversial books within a period of 3 years. The most important 10 of those books are: 1. Anti-Semitism among Christians and Arabs. 2. The Fortress of Islam, which controls the minds of Muslims. 3. The deeply ingrained misogynistic teachings in Islam. 4. Critical study of the life of a demon-possessed prophet. 5. The opinions of great thinkers, men and women on Islam. 6. The Quran is self-defeated book. 7. Islam and anti-Reformation. 8. Christ versus Muhammad. 9. Let us be united against Islamic terrorism. 10. Toward a peaceful international community without religious terror and Muslim terrorists. If we want comment on every one of those controversial books and try to find out the reactions and responses to its contents, then we need to write at least a couple of chapters on each one. To avoid such lengthy procedures, I prefer to refer the reader to the book itself. Besides being a poor book reviewer, I may not be able to do justice to one chapter in a single book of the genius Sudanese girl Dr. Ibtihal. Suffice it to say, charismatic writers are gifted in drafting controversial books. So commenting on them would be doing damage to them. They are meant to influence and make tremendous changes in society. Their contents are like new philosophies or religions. They carry beneath them a revolution, a revolt that is meant to force a change. Resistance to those philosophical works would make them more powerful and help them to fulfill their goals. Just to mention 2 examples of those charismatic people who changed the world, Socrates and Christ. The Western civilization that became in our time the most appealing and good example for all other civilizations is built on the ideas of those 2 great minds. Some philosophers and thinkers said that the West is indebted to 2 cities, Athens and Jerusalem, and 2 people, Socrates and Christ. The Athenian community thought by killing Socrates, it would kill his innovative ideas with him. However, his ideas survived in the works of Plato and influenced Aristotle. The Jewish society of the 1st century believed that by nailing Christ to the cross his new religion would die with him. Nevertheless, his crucifixion brought to the world the most powerful message that continues to be the leading religion throughout history. After those two great Western minds, someone arose in the desert of Arabia in the 7th century and claimed supremacy over Christ and Socrates. Some Arab people believed in him, and many more outside of Arabia were forced by the sword to follow his religion. Those who refused to forsake their religion and follow him were slaughtered, their women were raped, their children were enslaved, their properties were robbed, and their lands were occupied by those bloody thirsty Muslim mujahideen. That man taught dangerous satanic doctrines which no one before him or anyone after him taught. He claimed to be the messenger of God, and anyone who refused to accept his claim or forsake his religion would be put to death. His ideas became in our modern world the breeding mechanism of religious terror and terrorists. After 14 centuries, his religion became the second leading religion in the world, and 1.5 billion people blindly believe it. A young woman came from a remote corner of Africa. She is from a war-torn country and society filled with religious bigotry and racial strife. It is the most backward and poor country in the world. The people of that country are confused and suffering from an identity crisis. They are neither Africans nor Arabs. Though they are Africans outwardly, they claim to be Arabs after the people who invaded them and converted them to Islam by the sword. Because they are blacks, their Arab invaders named them the people of black faces, and hence their country's name was changed from the kingdom of Kush to the land of Sudan. It is an oxymoron sentence if a black man or a black woman claims to be he or she is an Arab. Even so, the black Africans of that country are foolishly making such a false claim. From where that young woman came, it is the last place on earth that someone might expect it to produce such a great mind. That young woman believes she could rid the world of the dangerous teachings of that Antichrist prophet, who was a demon-possessed and controlled by Satan the devil. She went through bitter experiences of being once one of his abused followers. Then she became a Muslim apostate and deserter. She was tortured, beaten, and abused physically and sexually. She was condemned to death because she rejected him. For her noble cause, she was imprisoned in Africa, Europe, and North America. She escaped many assassination attempts. Those bitter experiences created in her an unbreakable personality. When she began to speak out about her views, she created disturbance and restlessness in the minds and hearts of many. As much as she is hated, she is loved too. That woman is the Sudanese Muslim apostate girl Ibtihal Taha al-Amin, the founder of the Muslims' liberation movement. Can she succeed in achieving the objectives of her liberation movement of the Muslims of the world whom she believes are hostages and victims of the dangerous and misogynistic teachings of Islam? The coming pages can answer this question. Chapter 67. The Prophet Who Wants to Kill Allah. The first secular government in Europe to apply partially the decision of the International Criminal Court regarding the suspicious and terror-inspiring religious texts of the Quran and hadiths of the alleged prophet of God Muhammad is Denmark. The country of Denmark did not place the texts of Islam on ban but placed some restrictions on their usage and application. It restricted the Quran from being taught in public and private schools. It also forbade certain verses of the Quran, which are deemed dangerous and likely to create religious terrorists, from being used in Islamic mosques during prayers and sermons.
Shortly after Denmark, the Netherlands applied the same restrictions on the Islamic sacred texts of the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. However, the government of the Netherlands went a step further than the government of Denmark and considered any verse in the Quran or hadith of the Prophet Muhammad that meant to condemn and insult Christians, Jews, or followers of other religions is a serious offense. Any Muslim preacher or layperson who reads in public place, or writes, sells, distributes, or publishes such offensive verses or hadiths must be subjected to legal prosecution. The country of the Netherlands published an official list of those forbidden verses and hadiths. The verses and hadiths in which the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad referred to the Jews as apes and pigs and called Christians infidels and deluded people and cursed them are listed as high offenses in the Dutch law. The list included the infamous hadith in which Muhammad said, "I have been commanded to fight all people until they testify that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. If they say it, they uphold from me their blood and wealth." The infamous verse of Surah Al-Tawbah 5, verse 29, and the notorious verse of the sword in Surah Al-Tawbah 9, verse 5, which give Muslims the right to kill non-Muslims if they refuse to accept Islam, are considered crimes to teach or read them in any schools or mosques in the Netherlands. The opening surah of the Quran, which included a verse that referred to the Jews as people the wrath of God abides on them, and the Christians as people who have gone astray and deluded. This verse is considered offensive, judgmental, and hence placed on the list of the forbidden verses of the Quran. By placing this verse on the list of the offensive verses of the Quran and forbidding it, the government of Amsterdam created a serious religious problem for Muslims. It is imperative and compulsory for every Muslim man and Muslima woman to recite this verse 5 times in the day during his and her 5 daily prayers. Muslim prayer is considered incomplete and unacceptable by Allah if the performer does not back it up by loudly reciting this verse 5 times in the day. Oops, I have made mathematical mistake, and please pardon my poor calculation. The verse must be recited 2 times in the morning prayer plus 4 times in the noon prayer plus 4 times in the sunset prayer plus 3 times in the evening prayer plus 4 times in the night prayer equals 17 times each day. 17 times in the day, every Muslim man and each Muslima woman in their 5 prayers must condemn the Jews as accursed people on whom the wrath of God remained forever, and judge the Christians as deceived and deluded people forever. Without doing that, the Muslims' daily 5 prayers will be incomplete and unacceptable in the sight of Allah. Muslim leaders and preachers in the Netherlands have interpreted the ban on the recitation of the opening surah of the Quran during the 5 compulsory prayers as forcing Muslims to forsake their faith. They asked in anger, "How can we remain Muslims if we cannot recite Surah Al-Fatiha of the Holy Quran in our daily 5 prayers?" One legislator in the government of the Netherlands suggested that Muslims should be allowed to recite only 6 verses of the surah, and the last offensive 7th verse must be placed on the list of the forbidden verses of the Quran. Muslims rejected the proposal because this is the only surah in their sacred Quran that no one can read it partially. One Dutch cartoonist created a funny cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad while he is standing before Allah and screaming in his face, "If you do not allow me to curse the Jews and condemn the Christians 17 times in the day and slay anyone who refuses my message, I won't be your messenger." The cartoon drawing showed the sword in the hand of the Prophet Muhammad dripping blood, which frightened Allah and made him say to himself, "If I don't allow this crazy prophet to do what he wants, I might lose my head too." Muslims went to the streets and began to shout words condemning the government of the Netherlands and the cartoonist who made fun of their infallible prophet. The Dutch police responded at once and forced them to retreat to their residences.
Those who tried to resist and fight back were battered and arrested by the police. On the second day, Muslims stormed the streets of Amsterdam and other cities in the Netherlands shouting slogans condemning the decision of the government. Once again, the police engaged with them in fierce fighting, which led to many fatalities. On the third day, Muslims of the Netherlands went on the streets. This time, many religious rioters got killed because they engaged in fierce fighting with the Dutch police. To prevent further human causalities, the Mufti of Egypt, who is the rector of Al-Azhar Al-Sharif University, issued a fatwa. The new religious decree permitted Muslims in the land of the infidels, the Netherlands, to recite the opening surah of the Quran, which is known as Surah Al-Fatiha, verses 1 to 6 in their 5 prayers in the day, without including the 7th verse which condemns the Jews and Christians. This new fatwa has temporarily solved the religious crisis in the Netherlands. Chapter 68. Clash of Civilizations. Amid the turmoil in the Netherlands and Denmark, the Muslims' liberation movement had convinced thousands upon thousands of Muslims to forsake Islam every month. The new writings of the controversial author, the Muslim apostate girl Dr. Ibtihal forced many closed minds among Muslim families in Europe to open up. Her new controversial books awakened many Muslims from the deception of Islam. A quite substantial number of Muslim students began to question the divine authenticity of their sacred religious texts openly, which led to serious conflicts between them and their parents. There are reports of Muslim girls and boys who got murdered by their own parents for daring to question the truthfulness of the Prophet Muhammad's message. Some Muslim families left Europe and returned to the Middle East before their sons and daughters get influenced by the so-called anti-Islamic movement, which is euphemistically called the Muslims' Liberation Movement. The third Western country to apply the decision of the International Criminal Court is Australia.
The government of Australia tried to avoid the mistakes of the Netherlands and Denmark. It considered the decision of the International Criminal Court a good step toward solving the problem of the Islamic terrorism in the world. It implemented the decision of the International Criminal Court in a way it expected Muslims to cooperate with it. It encouraged Muslim scholars to purge their religious texts, the Quran and Hadiths of Muhammad, from any teachings that may lead to violence and produce religious terror. Then the Australian government circulated a list of those verses and hadiths that it expected Muslims to remove from their religious texts. The government of Australia based its conclusion on an erroneous belief in the West that after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, many Arab passions and cultures crept into the Quran and his hadiths. Accordingly, the Australian government concluded that those verses and hadiths that were not originally part of the Holy Quran and the sacred hadiths of Muhammad were added to Islam after the death of its founder. They are the ones that teach terror and misogyny. One spokeswoman of the Australian government said the present Quran is carrying within it two contradictory teachings. On one side, it teaches its followers to apply a peaceful approach in spreading Islam and encouraging religious tolerance. On the other side, it forces non-Muslims to accept the religion of Muhammad by the edge of the sword. The same thing can be deduced from the teachings of the Quran and hadiths about misogyny against women and violence against non-believers. The spokeswoman concluded that the same person could not possibly teach those two contradictory messages unless that person was insane, psychopathic, or led by some demonic force. The decision of Australia and the words of the spokeswoman of the government are considered by Muslims to be the highest types of insults and blasphemies that have ever been spoken against the Holy Quran and the infallible Prophet of Islam. Muslims in Australia reacted violently and went into the streets shouting condemnation of the government's decision.
They demanded that the spokeswoman of the government must apologize to the Muslim community and resign her position. Some Muslim imams of mosques and other Islamic religious leaders called upon Muslims to boycott the government and refrain from going to work. Most Muslims obeyed the call of their religious leaders, boycotted the government, and stopped going to work. The Australian government refused to bend to the pressures and demands of the Muslim community. Therefore, the decision of Muslims created serious social and economical problems. Muslim families wanted to be transferred to the social system and be paid welfare benefits. The government of Australia refused to pay any welfare benefits to Muslim families because they stopped going to work for reasons that do not qualify them to receive social assistance. There are already thousands of Muslims in the welfare system. Being left without any financial assistance, some Muslim parents are compelled to renegade on their promises to their leaders and community and return to work. Then Muslim imams have collectively issued fatwa condemning any Muslim parents who return to work. The joint fatwa stated that those parents have become Muslim apostates and therefore deserve to be treated the same way the Sharia dealt with Muslims in the past who forsook Islam for material gains. The Australian government interpreted the fatwa as practicing law that is not lawful to practice in a secular country. Furthermore, the government is worried that some Muslims may interpret the fatwa as a license to kill the so-called apostatized Muslim parents. For that reason, those Islamic leaders who issued the joint fatwa have been arrested and placed under trial. While the crisis in Australia is going on, Germany adopted the resolution of the International Criminal Court and considered the verses and hadiths that are ruled as sources and causes of Islamic terror unlawful to be taught in the country. But Germany did not issue any list of forbidden verses and hadiths. It recommended that all Muslim imams, leaders, and teachers should refer to the report of the International Criminal Court, which included all those hostile verses and hadiths. After what happened in the Netherlands, Denmark, and Australia, the Muslims of Germany decided to deal with the issue tactfully. Their imams and leaders requested the government of Germany to engage with them in religious debate. The government refused to accept or encourage any religious debate on legal issues. When diplomacy could not make the government reconsider its decision, Muslims began to fill the streets of Germany and protest the decision of the government. The German police decided not to stop Muslim protesters if they are expressing their protest peacefully. Consequently, in Germany, only a few arrests took place due to some individuals' misbehaviors during the protest. Those individuals had been apprehended either for teasing Muslim women or pickpocketing. Spain is the first Western country to apply the resolution of the International Criminal Court in its totality. The government of Madrid considered those religious texts of the Quran and hadiths not suitable for any kind of teaching. History and practice proved that those Islamic texts carry within them dangerous and defective doctrines, and teaching them can encourage oppression of women, hatred toward non-Muslims, religious terror, and crippling the minds of their followers. The history of Spain is a strong testimony of the bloody invasions when Muslim mujahideen, under the notorious Muslim leader Tariq ibn Ziyad, forced by their swords and spears their religion on the Christian Spaniards. Fortunately, the two kings, Ferdinand and Isabella, were able to rid Spain of Islamic dominion through the Reconquista of the Iberian Peninsula and kicked the Muslim Moors out of it. For those reasons, the government of Spain issued a decree forbidding any mosque, school, institute, or university, whether it is religious or secular, to teach in private or public the two condemned Islamic texts. However, the government permitted the followers of Islam to use specific and selective verses of the Quran in their prayers.
The government threatened to shut down any Islamic or Arabic school that included the teaching of those forbidden texts in its curriculum. The decision of Spain made Muslim leaders of Al-Azhar al-Sharif University in Egypt believe that there is an international conspiracy against Islam. Therefore, they called for a general meeting in Cairo city and invited representatives from all Muslim countries to come and decide how to respond to the ICC decision, which came due to the instigation of the Muslim apostate woman who is the founder of the anti-Islamic movement, which began in Canada and spread like coronavirus in Europe and started poisoning the minds of people in the Western countries. Before the meeting takes place, France, Sweden, Norway, Poland, Hungary, Austria, Bulgaria, Belgium, Japan, and South Africa have adopted the resolution of the International Criminal Court. The decisions of those countries caused bloody clashes between Muslim protesters and the police authorities in those non-Muslim lands. By then, it became clear to all non-Muslim countries that the sources and causes of the Islamic religious terror are the violent and hostile teachings in the main texts of the Quran and hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. The law of the Islamic taqiyya could not work anymore. The International Islamic Meeting in Cairo led some zealot and fanatical religious scholars and leaders and presidents to make some emotional and hasty decisions. The meeting decided to boycott all those countries that adopted the anti-Islamic verdict of the Zionist court, which is cunningly called the International Criminal Court. Although Canada did not adopt the resolution, it has been included in the list of the countries to be boycotted because it gave a base for the accursed anti-Islamic movement that is inoffensively known as the Muslims' Liberation Movement. The meeting required all Muslim countries in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Europe to place political and economical sanctions on all those countries that accepted and applied the resolution of the International Criminal Court. Muslims living in those accursed and unbelieving countries have been encouraged to return to their Muslim homelands.
Muslims who fled out of their countries due to political or humanitarian reasons are promised general amnesty. The most dangerous decision of the meeting is the one that required Muslim countries to kick out of their lands all infidel Christians and cursed Jews. For unknown reasons, Hindus and Buddhists working in Gulf countries are included in the kick-out list. The meeting called for the destruction and demolishment of all Christian churches, Jewish synagogues, and Hindu temples in Muslim countries. The Muslim governments must nationalize and sell the properties, wealth, and other assets of Christians, Jews, Hindus, and Buddhists, and their revenues should be distributed among poor Muslims. Moreover, the meeting has decided that no flights coming from those infidel countries should be allowed to land in Muslim countries, and no Islamic aircraft be allowed to carry passengers to those cursed countries. Their goods have to be boycotted. Their embassies must be shut down, and their diplomats should be kicked out of the 55 Muslim countries. There are many more inhumane, impracticable, and drastic decisions made by the Cairo Islamic International Emergency Meeting. Thank God, the governments of the Muslim countries, barring the political and economical sanctions, have applied none of those decisions. Consequently, any country that accepted and applied the resolution of the International Criminal Court, including Canada, has been politically and economically boycotted, its embassy and consulate closed, and its political delegates kicked out. In the meantime, the United States of America and other North and South American continents are watching in amazement the development of the clash of civilizations between Europe and the Middle East and other Muslim countries. It seems history is repeating itself all over again for the USA. In the Second World War, America adopted a non-interfering policy when the European countries were engaged in bloody war, and the Asian and African countries were forcibly dragged into it. Can that policy work today after the world became one globe?
During this tough time, the senators of the White House are pressing hard on the American government to decide which side to follow. Should the White House follow the resolution of the International Criminal Court or the decisions of the Cairo Islamic International Emergency Meeting? Eventually, the White House is compelled to decide, and it decided in favor of the International Criminal Court. Shortly after the USA, the rest of the Western countries have voted in favor of the International Criminal Court decision on the main texts of Islam, except Turkey and other independent Western and Asian Islamic countries, such as Azerbaijan, Kosovo, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Albania.